So today is the 17th day of Kislev, the 18th of December. And it's the yahrzeit of my mother-in-law, Juliet Bat Emma. I never met her. She passed away when my wife was 8 years old. So, but she's a very beautiful one in many, many ways. Okay. So let's see. So yesterday we're learning this piece from Torah's Chaim, from Shmos, Daf Shin Samech Amud Gimel. And this, the Tzemach Tzedek sent us to this mimer from his grandfather, even though it's in the Torah's Chaim, and in the Middle Rebbe it's a mimer from his grandfather. This was always the basis for understanding the tzitz, the foreplate, the plate on the forehead of the high priest. So let's start from the second paragraph again. So the lower will that we said, this we had a lot of discussion about yesterday. It's triggered by the mind, but the difference is that the lower is able to enclose itself in understanding, in some kind of reason. So afterwards, the person also understands that this is why I want so and so. He has a reasoning for it. He has a logic behind it.
That means it's going through a certain tzimtzum. I mean, the lower one is going through a certain tzimtzum.
It's mitzumtzam to begin with. It's not. Even though it's from the crown. It has an aspect of being a makif. Maybe it started out that way in some way, but it's not. It's not like the higher will. The higher will, nobody knows where it comes from. And the main thing about the higher will is that it can't enclose within the mind. There's no way to enclose it, because the person just knows that this is what they need to do. They have no idea why. But here, this lower will, it's able to enclose itself in the mind. Now, אף על פי שהשכל מלבישו מכל מקום, כשעדיין אור השכל מאיר בו הוא כולו רחמים וחסדים, כי אין השכל לבוש מסתיר כלל. So what does he say here? That this higher will, even though it's enclosed in the mind, and you would think that enclosing it in the mind would limit it in some way. It would cause any kind of limitation as din. Any kind of contraction is a din, is a judgment. So you would think that the judgment would limit its essential aspect. Still, as long as the mind, apparently the original mind is still inside it, the original reasoning is inside it, it's all mercy, it's all compassion and chasadim. Ki ein hasechel levush mastir klal. So it's very interesting, this whole makeup here, that what it started out with is somehow a reason. There was some reason for which I wanted this and this. That's the lower will. It always starts from some experience, some kind of something that I have, and that seems to me to be a good thing, a useful thing. Or, like we said, this is the type of reasoning that comes from Torah. That the person learned something, and because he learned something, he feels that this is the right thing to do. It may take a long time for it to turn into will, but eventually it does. And then he says, as long as the original trigger, the original mindset, or the original understanding that caused the will to appear, is still illuminating within that will, then the will is entirely compassionate. Meaning it has an ability to act with patience. Whereas usually will is very powerful. Will is not so easily tamed. When a person has something that they really want to do, then it says, "En davar ha'omed bifnei haratzon." There's nothing that stands in the way of will. It's very, very powerful.
You're saying once you have reason,
but the reason
gives the compassion.
Right, it gives it compassion. Why? Now we'll explain. Because the reason, the original learning that he did, which brought him to that will, remains as some kind of mature state within the will.
Oh, rather than just the will
right.
itself.
If it was just the will itself, it would be kovadina tahar. It's like end of our is like there's incredible strength in it, and it doesn't stop for anything. Like it won't stop.
Right.
But when there's some kind of understanding, then
Yeah.
it's different.
It's tempered, so to
It's
speak.
tempered. אלא במוחין שבמידות הוא מתגלה להיות הרצון על פי השכל. Sorry, I skipped. כי אין השכל לבוש מסתיר כלל. Because in this case, the mind that he now has is not going to hide the compassion. אלא במוחין שבמידות הוא מתגלה להיות הרצון על פי השכל. But when the mind goes down to the emotions, it has to go down to the emotions to become anything powerful, to be used. Again, everything is flowing down, as it were, until you come to action, until you express your will, and so on. So that becomes the ratzon al pi hasechel. It becomes that even in the emotions, he has some mature mindset that's tempering, like you said, the power of this will.
I know when it says "Ke'en hasechel levush mastir klal."
Right.
I mean, it mastir, but ma mastir. What?
The compassion.
No?
The compassion.
So the compassion doesn't come from the sechel. The
No.
compassion is the ratzon.
Right, because there's two sechels here. The first sechel is what he learned. Let's say he learned something in Torah and decided he wants to put tefillin on. So, say it like this. Maybe this is a good example. A person has this terrible yearning to. Let's say they just see someone. Let's take a woman as more of an example because I've seen this actually happen. So a woman sees someone lights Shabbos candles. And she doesn't know what this means, but she's taken by it very, very strongly. There's no mind in it. There's no understanding at all. It's just, this I want. And she didn't learn anything. It's just or suddenly even from herself. She suddenly feels, she feels a calling that I have to do. And then, one time she's late. She's late. And she knows in the back of her mind that if you're late to lighting Shabbos candle, you shouldn't light them. But that doesn't work with with what you want, because the person wants to light Shabbos candles very much. She very much wants it, so she lights anyway. So that's the example that there's no temperance. There's no the will is very, very powerful. So there's nothing that stops it. Even if you tell her just simply don't do it, it won't. So the sechel eno mastir, like this seichel is not enough to stop it.
It's like Sadducees. In other words,
it's
the same thing. They don't have the seichel bior. That wasn't.
That's a great example.
Boom.
A Karai is like this.
Yeah,
The Karaites.
right, the Karaites.
The Sadducees were the Karaites. They were the original Karaites.
Yeah, correct.
So there's no thinking there. It's just that this is what it's like an idol worshiper. In the end, it's like a cannibal. This is how we do it. Period. There's no thinking. There's nothing to stop it. So there has to be, once it comes into the mind. If it started from a true mind, then there's a lot of maturity in it.
Yes.
Not everything I want I do. I have to think: is this okay to do it? Not okay to do it. So here the sechel is not a levush mastir klal. Ken sechel levush mastir klal, meaning that you might think that when it's coming down, it would just come down as powerful will without anything. But the sechel doesn't conceal the compassion in the will. It just comes down with it. ואומנם זהו דווקא כשהרצון עולה מיד ששכלו מחייבו להיות לו רצון שאז השכל עדיין בהערתו. But this is as long as the original learning is still there. If the original learning is not there, then again it goes back to a different state. It's the maturity of the learning that keeps the will compassionate and keeps it patient. When he says compassionate here, it's more like saying passion. Even though he said it's rachamim v'chasadim, what he means is from the right side that it's compassion. That it's not fiery. Yes. It's not like just to destroy the world. Yes. Another example is Rashbi when he came out of the cave after 12 years. So there, everything was fire for them. Like they can. Another year inside, that was like to understand why this is all the way it is, and then when they came out, so his son would burn things and he would mend them again, he would remedy them. There was some other process that was going on. So he says, what happens if the seichel is not there anymore? אבל יש עוד בחינת רצון בו אשר גמר בדעתו פעם אחת שראוי לאהוב ולרצות דבר מה, ואחר כך נשכח הטעם, והשכל לא אותו רצון. But there's sometimes that the original learning, the original teaching is forgotten. The person learns, and he knows this is what you're supposed to do, but then he forgets what the reason was. Now, you would think, okay, so he doesn't remember what the reason is. The main thing is that he does. He says, no, if he forgets the reason, then it becomes, again, just pure will without any compassion in it. There's no ability to temper it. It just comes down as strong as it is. It's only agreed upon in his psyche that this is what needs to be done. And this is all he's accepted this, that this is the way you have to do things, and he can't do them any other way. So all he has is a strong determination to do the act, and he doesn't remember why. This is what we call the forehead above, and the forehead of Za. The forehead here, everything we're talking about is of Za in Atzilut. Everything is the partsuf of the lower countenance. Why the small countenance? Because if this was all in the higher countenance, it would be entirely patience. There would be nothing. We wouldn't be talking about this. The whole question is, Za has stages. Sometimes he's mature, sometimes he's not mature. Here, even though he was mature at some point, because he studied this, and this this idea came to him because he learned. But because he doesn't remember it anymore, it's like it's gone. He's gone back to an immature state. And in an immature state, it's called mitzcha. It's just called the forehead. So all he has is the determination to do something. Or haskama. I need a better word for haskama. But it's like that. It's agreed upon. I've committed myself to this. That all I have is my commitment. I don't have anything else. So commitment by itself is like being in a state of immaturity. Now we can take this and see how this works physically, in the symbolism of the human form. In the lower human, meaning in the form of the human that we see that the forehead covers or conceals the mind behind it. It conceals all of the brain. Meaning, what do you see? All you see is the person's forehead. That's all you see. And the same thing is about this commitment the person has taken upon himself after having thought. That there's no thought behind, you can't see any thought process, maturity behind the decision to act in a certain way. All you see is the order, the capacity for a person to be committed to something. That's all you see.
It's willful.
It's very. So we say the metzach is a sign of will. But what kind of will? Will that conceals the mind, where there's no mind. He's not saying there's no mind. There was mind, because initially it's what triggered everything, but it's gone. He forgot it. So now this conceals the initial mind that was there. Just like the brain is hidden behind or under the forehead. And in the same vein, the opposite. If he can still tell you the reason why he does so and so, they still remember the reason, then it's called Gilui Mochin. And then even when he does something, it's called a revelation of his mind. Because in what he's doing, in what he's willing, he has a reason. And it's a completely different thing. So we understand now what a minhag is. In a minhag, even in the word minhag, you hear nehi. You hear the nun he yud. The idea of a minhag is that nobody remembers what the initial reason is. Okay? No, there's no. So it's very interesting that the minhag that everybody, I don't know, it's probably many, but the one I keep hearing all the time, and this when I first came into Chassidus, this was the main example, was that in some shul, they, when they do a kafos, when they come to a certain place, everybody like stoops down for a second. And nobody knew why. And finally they asked one of the older men that was there, and he said, I remember that in the original shul, they always said this about Germany, I don't know why. He said it was a shul from Germany, there was a chandelier here. So they had that. So why did that strike me as connected? Because they were afraid to hit their forehead. So a minhag, the minhag is like to refrain from hitting the forehead. But that's on the one hand it's dangerous, on the other hand it's good. On the one hand it's good that the person can, as human beings we have this ability to retain the action without remembering the reason. On the other hand, when that is, then when there's no mindset in it, there's no mind in it, it's very harsh. It's not. There's no room for discussion. There's nothing. On the third hand, you would say, but that's exactly why we don't change it, because if you remember batal tam lo bat, the whole discussion in the Achronim, when does a minhag cancel? So they say, if we know for 100%, we know the reason why the minhag was, and the reason is no longer available, it's not relevant anymore, then you can cancel the minhag. That's what most of the Achronim say. They say if you don't know the minhag 100%, then you can't cancel it. Because then you don't know, you never know. So they don't say like me, I'm like Lavan a little. Like in my mind, anything can be. So even if you think you know the minhag, maybe you don't know. The Achronim, they're much more normal. They're like, say, if you know the minhag, you know the reason, that's it. And if the reason's cancelled, it's no longer relevant, you can cancel the minhag.
In the army, there was always one gentleman standing in artillery. One person had to stand next to the gun. The others were behind them.
Why?
They couldn't understand why.
Because in Napoleonic times,
it was a horse. He was
Right.
holding the horse, but no horse anymore. No horses.
But that's exactly the very good. Very good.
אך כשהמוחין שמתגלה והרצון מתקצרים ולא נשאר גם רק הרשימו, אזי נעשה כמו ההסכם בלבד, ואותו ההסכם מאיר במצח, והוא תוקף הרצון. So, when the mindset is revealed, but it begins to shorten. What do we mean that it begins to shorten? Meaning the mind, the reason is still there, but it begins to shorten. So we say that when something begins to dwindle, it's like there was this theory for a long time, I don't know if it's still true, that cells can continue to divide as long as they have, what's it called? It starts with a T. At the end of the DNA, there's another material. I don't remember what it's called. It starts with the T.
Not RNA.
No. At the very end of the DNA itself, there's temerase, I think it's. I don't remember. It's another. It's an extension of the DNA, and every time that the cell divides, a little piece of it, a little chunk falls off, and eventually, when it becomes too short, the cell can't divide anymore, and that's when it dies. Like it dies completely. Telomerase, I think, is the name. סנדק של ברית? אין תחום. איזה יופי. שכוח. רגע, תבדוק, אולי זה רק בעל הברית. אולי רק לא, גם הסנדק. גם הסנדק. So the same thing here, you begin to forget. It's short, it means that it's not completely in there. It's there and it's not there. ולא נשאר גם רק הרשימו, and there's not even a leftover, a residue. אזי נעשה כמו ההסכם בלבד, ואותו ההסכם מאיר במצח והוא תוקף הרצון. And so the last piece, it's like he says, what happens here is as long as the mind is revealed, so the mitzvah is not called mitzvah. The forehead is not anything special. But when you get to the end, there's a last stand, as it were. The last piece comes out. The last piece of the will comes out into the forehead. I have to say Kaddish. And that's what makes the mitzvah. ידע ויזכר שמי רבו. אמר עושה מעצמו עושה לעצמם כנב קרא משיחי. היכון ומכון וחי לחווי ישראל. אלא מפה בבשר ושיר בשר ושיר בשר ובבשר ומרמב"ן מהר מגרון העשר והרמב"ן ובבשר ובבשר רייסה ובבשר אדם ובבשר ובבשר אלא לנו לכון שמע אמר ובבשר ובבשר שמעיות ומרומי היצר ובגון משמעיה וחיים טובים עליהם כל ישראל ממוני ספר המילון מרבי הספר המלם כל ישראל ממוני